tell the world who you are and what you do.
My name is Melissa Pine, and I've been a dog fancier my entire life and been into the Alapaha for, oh goodness, full-time, over 12 years as a breeder and owner, and the White English Bulldog for 9 years as a breeder and owner as well, and spend more time enjoying my dogs than I do breeding my dogs.
Okay. Now, as much as I want to get right into the history of the Alapaha, I gotta ask about the White English first, because that is the root of so many things going on in the Bulldog world. The White English, if I'm not mistaken, was that one of the first Bulldog imports from overseas?
That's essentially what it is known as. Because it is a geographically isolated breed. It's all from the southeast, the Florida, Georgia, Alabama regions. A little bit of outskirting into, the other surrounding states, but it's still very minimal. And a lot of the American Bulldog lines do share similar traits as well as blood as the White English.
Okay. Is there a difference? I'm sure there is, but I want to get it from your take. Is there a difference between the White English and the Old Southern White?
In my opinion, yes. Temperament is going to be the biggest divider between the White English and the Old Southern White, and even, some of the American Bulldog lines out there, because, the White English, and I'll also throw the Alapaha in there as well. So when you have a good, well-balanced White English, they are lower in prey drive. Just naturally, they're a very chill dog. I mean, I've got 4-week-old puppies that they're content sitting right there by your side. Mm-hmm. They're content laying in their crate without being directed to. They're content with my chickens and my guineas, even though they're screaming and running after them and just being, birds. And the dogs have zero prey to them whatsoever. That prey drive or lack thereof in the White English is the true separator between an Old Southern White, performance bred American Bulldog, and Alapaha, because a lot of those, they have that higher drive. Their prey drive is excessively high. So, I have Alapahas that their mom is my White English, but they took that drive and they love my birds every chance they get. The bird gets in their kennel, there's lunch. So that's how, one of the first things that I do notice as a temperament difference. And you can have a mix of a little bit higher prey drive in the White English, and that's just kind of where you can tell maybe some, more modern American Bulldog or Old Southern Bulldog or Old Southern Whites was brought into it, and that kind of changes the temperament. From a protection standpoint, the White English is a little bit more protective. They are a lot more leery and aloof of outsiders, even outside animals that shouldn't be within property. And that's another kind of distinguishing trait is their level of defensiveness is more heightened too.
Okay. So when it comes to the Alapaha, where did they come from exactly?
So they were generated in Georgia. So Lana Lulaine, she worked with several different breeders in her region. John Connors of Blue Blood Bulls, he was one of them, which he carried his strain of Bulldog, which was predominantly a White English as well. And then, she had, like Margaret Nicholson. Who else did she work with? There are several others that she'd acquired dogs from and incorporate that into her breeding, put her name in front of them. But they were still all from the Alapaha River region, all in that Hawkinsville, Georgia region area. And that's where they were basically created and bred from.
Okay. So, where did the Merle gene come from initially?
There's so much speculation. Basically, what we can say is Catahoula for sure is there. You can see a lot of traits. Like if you really understand dogs, you can see the traits of different breeds that are within the Alapaha that kind of help make it up. But, you know, the hound traits that are there, the aloofness that are there, kind of the gaminess that is there, like that's going to come from that Catahoula, as well as the houndy look that you can see in certain lines of the Alapaha. There's mention of Great Dane could have been used. I don't know if I necessarily believe that, just because we don't see dogs of that stature in the breed. Now, mind you, you will get some big dogs. I mean, I've bred numerous very, very large dogs that they're the exception to the rule. But they're not Great Dane size. You know, potentially large American Bulldog size, but not, or what another strain of the White English is, the Georgia Giant. But they're bigger dogs. You know, they're 25 plus inches, you know, 110 pounds on average, but definitely not Great Dane size. So I'm on the fence on confirmation that Great Dane is behind there. There's not been enough genetic evidence before breed markers were identified that showed Dane is back there in the markers. Catahoula doesn't show up in there, but the Merle's got to come from somewhere. And Catahoula plus the traits, that's my leaning deciding factor on where that's being added from.
Okay. So, being that the Alapaha has White English heritage, do you ever cross the two personally?
Actually, I did. So Sugar, who is my first White English, she was acquired specifically for adding into my Alapaha program, because she comes down from the Par White English line, which that is known heritage as foundation stock for the Alapaha that Lana used, because the breeder and the original person that my dogs come down from, she bred with John Connors. He still was using her stock up until the day he died, and then he bred directly with Lana. So the connection, the dots are there, and that was literally the whole reason why I got my girl Sugar. She's actually been used in all of my breedings for the Alapaha, with the exception of one. And she produces very true to type and very consistent in what she is producing.
Okay. So walk me through your day. What do you do with these guys on the day-to-day?
Well, for right now, my life is crazy busy, so they just spend more time being companions. My White English, I've actually started focusing them on more towards livestock guardian type duties, so I take my dogs out with my birds. Right now, that's what I have on my yard, is just chickens and my dogs. But my pups go out, my girl Dumpling goes out. Sugar, I had an instance a few weeks ago with a fox killing off my chickens. Sugar lived in the barn at night to keep the fox at bay, so I didn't lose any more birds. So that's really where my program is going to start being focused more towards, is the livestock guardian side of it, because like the Alapahas, like you just don't have enough consistency for that. Now I do use my Alapahas for protection dogs, because the natural ability to protect with minimal training is ideal, and that's one of the things, like being as a single woman, especially like if I go somewhere or I want to take a walk along the river and it's sketchy, like I feel safe and confident that yes, I know my dogs will do what needs to be done based on genetics, as well as exposure to a trainer to test them to say, okay, well, what are you going to do in this type of a situation? So those are really the two primary focals that I use my program for. And thankfully, like with my line of White English, like even those dogs have proven to me that they have the ability and the instincts to engage in somebody, and their level of engagement is distinctly different than the Alapaha. They kind of do that bluff moment at first, but once they reach a certain point, like if they're going to engage, they're going full force and they're going to try to bite you, and they're not going to give you a warning that they're going to engage. They don't bark before they go after you. It's an instant. They're on you and you're like, holy cow, what just happened? Right. So that's pretty much the focus that I use for my dogs, is the protection and then also the livestock use.
Okay.
And then just my pets too. I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, I enjoy my dogs more than anything. I don't have my dogs to, pay for their feed bill or vet bills or anything like that. Like, I genuinely enjoy them. So first and foremost, they're always going to be my pets and my companions.
Right. I think a lot of people that become interested in breeding or keeping dogs, I think so many people miss that.
Yes.
First and foremost, it's like, well, do you even enjoy being around these animals?
Correct. And they look at it as a rate of investment.
Yes.
And I'm like, you don't ever do an ROI on an animal that is a companion animal. Now, I can see if it's livestock because it's different. But when it comes to a companion animal, like, they're your pet, they're your companion. And at the end of the day, if you're not investing in them to truly understand their traits and their characteristics and their temperaments, how can you even breed a better dog if you don't truly know your own dog?
Right.
So that's
Absolutely.
where, for me, understanding my dogs, spending time with them, and enjoying them as my companion is my first and foremost when it comes to being a dog person, because at the end of the day, that's just who you are when you're really into dogs. Like, it's not about how much money you can make off of a litter or how many puppies you can produce or anything like that. I just like having my dogs. Like,
yeah.
So that's where, like, my day-to-day is, okay, let's spend time with the dogs. Let's walk the property. I take, the dogs that can run loose, that I don't worry about them having chicken for dinner tonight. Yeah. They walk the property with me, and they see sheep and goats at my neighbor's house and outside dogs, and I work on recalls with them and just come sit at my feet and hang out, and that's pretty much my day-to-day with them.
Right. Okay. Yeah. In fact, I went to the park today. I didn't bring the dogs, but I should have because it was so beautiful out. But I only went to record some vlogging footage, and I was just talking about that in the vlog, which will probably be out next week. That according to the big dogs that have become mentors of mine in the dog game, you don't even really get a return on investment until X amount of generations later.
Yeah.
You got to become somebody before people want to pay those type of prices where you can make a living off it.
Yeah.
Until then, and that's the reason why I backed out of the game, kind of. Not saying I'll never breed, but to be a breeder like that, it's just, I guess it's just not in my DNA to have that many dogs. And that was a really hard decision to make, but I think more people need to self-examine like that, because so there's guys out there that get 2 dogs, they think about breeding, before you know it they got 6 dogs and a litter of puppies on the ground, and then they start having regrets.
Yep.
It's like, well, now what are you going to do with all these guys?
Yeah. Like, I hear you. And see, for me, it's like, I literally have breedings every 2 to 5 years that are planned, true, actual planned breedings every 2 to 5 years, if that. And It's like, and plus whenever I do breedings, I keep dogs back for myself, or I try to place them close so I can see how they grow and they mature and evaluate, how much of a success was that breeding. Is it following the standards of the breed? Was it a success, or was it something I'm like, well, maybe next time I won't do that pairing or do something similar of that pairing. You can't just push them out and push them out and push them out and cycle through your dogs because they didn't perform on one breeding you did with them, when in reality that was just a bad pairing. Mm-hmm. Great things don't happen overnight. Like you said, it takes generations before it really pays off, and you really have, a name and some weight in the game that people are like, yeah, they produce great dogs. Like, I'm going to go to them and I'm going to spend the money with them and I'm going to wait to get a dog with them. Right. And something else that I've experienced within just the dog world in general is that so many people don't truly honor their word. They're so quick that, oh, okay, well, I love your dog and I love your program and this, and this, but they don't want to wait.
Right.
They're so quick to just jump on the bandwagon instead of saying, you know what, I want to get a dog from you. They're going to say they're going to get a dog from you, and then they just completely ghost you. Yeah. And it's like, where's the integrity at?
Absolutely.
I mean, with Sugar, man, I'm telling you, I was watching that breeding and that planned pairing for months, And I'm like, and I'm that type of person too. Like, if I'm going to make that investment and I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make sure I do that so I don't let that breeder down. And, you know, they understand that, hey, you know, this person does support me. This person does, you know, want to keep this stuff going. Mm-hmm. And that's also another reason why I breed selectively and not very often, just because of you got everybody else you're competing with. And so many people are so quick to, you know, just jump to whatever's the quickest and available to them.
Right. And they're forgetting, too, that, you know, with a healthy dog, that's mm-hmm. a 12 to 16-year commitment.
Yes.
I mean, it's a step down from having a child, basically.
Oh, yeah, you know? It really is. And it's a lot of heartache. And even for us breeders, like, you know, when you have, you know, breedings that you worked 5 years to have happen and you get one viable pup and you end up, you know, it's costing you $3,000 just for a C-section because your pup, you know, couldn't come out, and you're like, ow, like that kind of, it's mentally and emotionally draining as a breeder. It makes you question, God, why am I putting myself through this? Like,
people don't see all facets of the working dog world. They just see the cool graphics on Facebook and the hype that's around it.
Yeah, it's the instant gratification that they see and that they want, but they don't realize what really is behind it. Or whenever you do the breeding and you've spent your time in understanding and watching and seeing the dogs in person as much as possible, and even, you know, online as much as possible. And then when you actually do the breeding and you start watching the pups develop, and you're like,
Yeah.
Bingo.
Bingo.
It makes the wheels start turning, and it starts opening your eyes up, especially like in relationship to the Alapaha. Like, you know, there's a lot behind the scenes that a lot of people don't realize. And, you know, every now and then you'll get people online and on Facebook asking about specific dogs. And I'm like, yeah, you don't want to breed for a dog like that. Mm-hmm. Just speaking from experience.
Right.
Speaking from what I know, that dog was not an Alapaha. He was used in the program through the ABBA. He's going to throw traits. Dogs that are heavily line bred off of that, you're going to have some things that you're not happy with, and you're going to be like, man, why do I have these issues? Mm-hmm. Why do I have dogs that range from 17 inches at the shoulder up to 24, 25 inches at the shoulder from the same litter? It's all because the things that were done in the late 90s and early 2000s, before the internet was as blown up as big as it is, and before the genetic research is as popular as it is, what was done in the dark is always going to come to the light. Mm-hmm. And if you don't understand what's truly behind the dogs and you try to shoot for that, you're going to have a litter that you're shaking your head on, you can't get rid of, and you can't do nothing with. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and it's a shame, but, you know, in my opinion, like, you know, I'm going to speak high level of the founder of the ABBA, but, you know, what his goal and intent to do, he sent it to the market too early. Consistency was not a factor, which is why you see such a broad range of types, phenotypes within the Alapaha world.
Okay. So it's still very much in its infancy.
Oh, unfortunately, so with certain breeders, you will see more consistency only because they've been breeding the same type for multiple generations and breeding type to type to type to type to type. Mm-hmm. But if somebody gets dogs from one breeder and then somebody gets dogs from another breeder, even though they may be from the same line, and then they breed them together, you're still going to have a mix of types that you're going to get in your litter. And even some of those breeders that have been breeding the same type to type to type to type, they're still going to have a variation in consistencies and size within their own litters. And it's all because of the dogs that were used, especially coming from ABBA Foundation stock, which Ray used dogs from all spectrum. As long as it was extra bully and it bite and it was aggressive, he used it. And it did not do the breed any justice whenever it comes to, creating consistency. Because within those breeds that he used, you are going to see traits of the English Bulldog, the stubbornness, the dumbness. I mean, the Alapaha should never be a dumb dog, but because of some of the dogs used, you're going to have those traits show up in your dogs, and it's going to go back more than just 3 or 5 generations. So you got to be mindful of all that stuff. And that's why, when people ask us questions about, hey, I like this dog Shaka. I don't want to line breed off Shaka. I'm just saying, I've seen it. I've experienced it in my own litters. And it makes me stop. And it's why I take so much time between breeding, so I can really see how the dogs actually mature out from a temperament standpoint. Are they skittish? Are they overly shy? Are they overly friendly? Are they overly aggressive? Are they dominant towards, their pack because they don't bond with their family? Like, these are all things that you have to look for within the breed, because, you're going to see posts regularly in some of the groups of people saying, hey, I need help with my dog. My dog is behaving this way at this age, and we don't know what to do.
Right.
So, yeah, his plan was, it was prematurely released.
Gotcha. So what's the general weight of the dogs you produce, or is it still kind of...
For me, mine are actually a lot more consistent. Mine are, on average, between 80 to about 105 pounds. Even my females, like I've got a female that she's 96 pounds. Her dad was 110. Her mom's 93 pounds. I got a male, he's 90 pounds. His mom is 93 pounds. His dad was right around, I think he's about 96 when he was at full mature weight. And his brother's 105 pounds. But for the most part, all of my dogs, I mean, even my girl Dumpling, who's coming up, and she's a full white English, she's out of Sugar and Cletus. She'll be a year next month, and she's, I think, in the 80-pound range, and she's not even hit maturity yet for a white English.
Gotcha. So, where are you located again?
Just outside of Wichita, Kansas.
Okay. And how do your dogs deal with the extreme temperatures? Well, first off, what extreme temperatures do you deal with? Does it get really cold in the winter, really hot in the summer?
We have all 4 seasons. We have hot, humid summers. We have hot, dry summers. We have mild winters. We have cold, bitter, negative 15-degree winters. We do deal with every single extreme, like just this past month, January it was. We had a week where it was sub-zero temperatures. And overall, my dogs do relatively well with the temperature changes. My white English, I have found they're more adapt to putting on weight and dropping weight as the seasons change. Their coats are a short coat, but it's not super close to the skin like the American Pitbull Terrier is. It's slightly longer and it's a little bit thicker. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Alapaha, you can kind of get a mix between the two. Those, if the dogs are adapted well enough, they do put on the weight and they drop the weight as the heat changes. I have a general rule. Once it gets to a certain temperature in the wintertime, all my dogs come in. They have their own crates in the house. Everybody gets crated up when temperatures are extreme and we've got sub-zero wind chills. And typically my general rule is if it's going to be colder than 20 at night, they're going to come in. Especially if it's going to be for an extended period of time that the wind chills are dropping that temperature even colder. Summertime, overall, they don't come in unless we have like severe storms running through. That's the only time. I mean, I'm that person. I love my dogs. At the end of the day, they're like my kids. They come in when the weather gets stormy. But summertime, I put my shade covers up. They have water troughs that the dogs that like to cool off in the water, they can get in there and cool off on their own, or sometimes I turn the misters on. It really just depends, but as long as they've got shade, they do well with the heat as well. The one nice thing I do like about the White English is that they actually are a free breather. Thankfully, I don't have any stenosis issues with my dog, so pinch nares, reduced nares, that issue isn't there. I just know that if I was outside doing some active things in the heat of the summer, they're not going to be part of it. Just because I wouldn't want them to overheat because of my ignorance on trying to work out. It's 110 degrees and no shade or nothing. That's silly in any dog owner's position, in my opinion, unless that dog was bred to live in the desert. But yeah, they do well. They acclimate well. Some of my dogs like to dig holes to create little tunnels to stay cool in, and others are just like, hey, I'm going to chill in my dog house, and others are like, hey, I'm going to cool my balls in the water trough. So, I mean, my dogs are smart enough that they tell me what they need. I had a dog that he passed a few years ago, but when we would go walk, when he was done, he would literally drag me down to the river to get in the water to cool off and then come back up and we'd keep walking. So they're super smart, intelligent dogs that they're going to tell you what they need. Right.
I see some of the photos here of your dogs doing some man work. Now, would you consider this work to be sport work or actual personal protection work?
I use that as a personal protection test.
Okay.
The biggest thing for me, because I do have such a busy schedule, I don't have the time available to do sport work. I would love to, but also we don't have a market like that where I'm at, so it's a challenge to find somebody that is familiar with decoy work and dealing with dogs like the Alapaha and even the White English. So I do have a trainer that's local. He's familiar with it. He's tested. He does decoy work. So he would actually test my dogs. And that's the biggest thing, is testing the dogs to see, will they engage or will they not engage? And at the end of the day, that's what's most important to me. If we are at home or I'm in the car or we are going for a walk, how will my dogs respond if somebody were to come and engage with me when they shouldn't be? Right. So that's what's more important to me than saying, oh yeah, my dog can do this and it can do that and it's got these titles, and I'm like, those titles don't mean nothing in the real world.
Right.
At the end of the day, people saying, oh yeah, the dog responded to an air horn. I'm like, how many people are going to attack you with an air horn?
Right. That makes sense.
Seriously. How many people are going to really attack somebody with an air horn? No, with a firearm, okay. How are they going to respond? I would expect something like that. Thankfully, where I'm at, I'm outside in the county. I got people on 10 acres, and they shoot their guns off like crazy. And my dogs, they raise hell, and they're like, what the hell's going on? And they're not cowering. They're not running into the dog houses. They're trying to get away. So they have exposure with that to keep them active regularly. So
that's good. Absolutely. Now, outside of the White English and the Alapaha, are there other breeds you're interested in?
I'm fascinated with all breeds of dogs. My heart's always going to go out to the American Pitbull Terrier. That was my first, one of my first loves of the dog breeds. But they've slowly been replaced. The Alapaha took their place, but the White English is really at the top of my list. I can't say as far as wanting to try to own a different breed. I don't think there's really another breed out there that I'd want to get into. I was exposed to Cane Corsos for about a year, and the Cane and the White English are a lot alike, very similar. when you look at the two, especially whenever you do a comparison of guardian breeds. But yeah, like, I mean, I like all the dogs out there, whether they're, you know, Patterdales are probably one of my favorite terriers out there. If I was into small dogs, I would probably get me a Patterdale only because of their tenacity and their heart behind them. But it's not a fad dog. I mean, for me, I don't like being part of the fads because the fads ruin dog breeds more so than anything else.
Absolutely. A buddy of mine who actually joined my registry decided to take a game Pitbull to a Patterdale, and yeah, he calls it the Black Powder Terrier.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And I'm so excited to see how they turn out. And I'm honored that, you know, he picked my registry to, you know, legitimize it. He's only one breeding in. He's taking his time, but he works his dogs. He's in those woods every day with those dogs. So I'm really excited. I always thought it would be a great idea. Like, man, what if we could just find the middle ground between the game Pitbull and the Patterdale? That would be, I think that would be what should be called the real pocket Pitbull.
Yeah, you know? and it's not quite the Staffordshire Bull Terrier,
right?
Because it's got more agility to it.
Yeah,
I guess that would be a great way to physically describe them.
Well, and I was always thinking, like, okay, if you live in an apartment and you wanted a protection dog, but there's a weight limit, well, here you go.
Yes. And you know what's funny is some people have actually put the Alapaha to the Frenchie.
What?
Yeah, some intentionally, some accidentally, but yes, they have intentionally. That's happened.
But why?
That's the last thing we need. But yes, it's yeah.
Oh,
mind you, some Alapahas, like if they're bred right and they're on the small side, it can easily be done and attainable to keep them on that smaller size. But you're going to have the grit behind them, and that's the kicker. And a lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to add some Alapaha to my pit," and I'm like, "You don't want to do that. You do not want to do that because I promise you, some of these dogs are dicks. Sorry, I don't know if I can cuss, but
yeah, of course you can.
I mean, they are absolute dangerous dogs, and because you'll find some of these dogs, they do not bond with owners. Some of them can be very obedient, but they just don't have that emotional connection, and they don't necessarily respect their people. And if you take dogs with that type of mindset or even, because I promise you, what's there right now is behind the breed as well. So what's done in the dark is always going to come to light. What's behind the breed is always going to come to the surface. Even if you have one puppy out of an entire litter, you will always have a dirk of a dog within your breedings. Always. I've hit it every single time. No, not intentionally, but every single time, every litter I've ever done, I've always had that one jerk of a dog that, by golly, they've gotten live bites. And yeah, like, or oh, you're being rough and rowdy in the house. Okay, you're not supposed to do this. I'm going to stop you and tell you no. And I'm going to bite you if I need to. Like, you don't take a dog like that and put it with something as athletic as an American Pit Bull Terrier that all they want to do is please their owners.
Right.
Because that creates an even more dangerous dog. And that's the scary thing about having dogs that are natural protectors and naturally aloof of people. That you have to understand your dogs and the puppies that you're producing to try to do your best to foresee what temperamental traits can come out in that dog at a later age and making sure that you have paired it into the right home. I mean, even with my mother on one of my breedings I did 5 years ago, she fell in love with the dog, and I said, "Mama, that is not your dog. I'm sorry. He is not the dog for you. He is too much for you. Yes, he's beautiful, but Dill is a dick. And his name is Dill Pickle, and he is a jerk. He lives with a friend of mine that we work with her. And he had a moment that he had to come live with me for a few months to get his manners back in act before he got to go back home. And then he had to have, new boundaries reestablished. And mind you, my friend that has him, she's very strong, very confident person, and she can hold her own. I mean, I love her to death because she has the tenacity behind her just as a person. And Dill made her have to stop and think like, oh, you are a jerk. So, but he's super loving and super duper amazing with her. But anybody outside of that, he's hell on wheels, and he wants to destroy anybody outside of the family.
I personally like that in a dog, but with that being said, that's just not for everybody. Dogs don't escape on my watch.
Correct.
They're confined. That is the number one most important thing when people want to get into having a dangerous dog, is being able to confine that dog, because if that dog bites somebody, it's legally equivalent to you just shot that person.
Yes, especially if it was unprovoked. And
Yeah.
It's not like that person broke into your house or attacked you or did something to cause bodily harm to you.
Right.
And that's where that line of crossing is so vital, and understanding the dogs and what's behind them is so important. And so many people have gotten into the Alapaha world thinking, oh, it's Merle, it's got blue eyes, it's Bully, it's this, it's that, and we can do this, and I can make this. And I'm like, Houston, we have a problem here.
Right.
You're not understanding what you're getting into. And like this Merle fad, I just shake my head against, because I'm like, you don't know what you're getting into with these dogs.
Yeah.
And the problems that are going to ensue with it, because you get this dog into the wrong hands. You have people on Facebook in these groups saying, my dog is 9 months old and it's growling at me and it's challenging me and it's doing this and it's doing that. And it's, well, anytime you're between that 9 months to 18-month age, especially with male Alapahas, that's when sexual maturity kicks in, and they're going to start challenging and figuring things out. And that's when really the switch flips.
Right.
And your dog is going to show you what you're going to be dealing with. And not everybody has the capacity or the knowledge or the resources to manage a dog like that. And I know a lot of people, they get upset with my responses whenever I see comments like that. And I'm like, here's the deal. Do not rehome that dog. If you cannot give it what it needs to be safe, and your people in your home safe, you need to humanely put that dog down. That's
Right.
what's in the best interest for the dog. Don't try to rehome it.
Right.
Because you're just creating a bigger issue. And that's a big problem. It's, kind of like the UK going in and banning the XL Bully. And if you don't understand the breeds and what they were bred for, and what breeds are going into some of these newer breeds, and what traits are going to come out. Like, people don't spend enough time understanding dog breeds as a whole to really, truly comprehend why they're seeing the things that they see in their dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's, when you ask, what do my days look like? I enjoy my dogs.
Mm-hmm.
I like to see my dogs, especially my white English, come in and they sniff things in like a hound dog, where they take it and they literally press their nose into it, doing deep breaths and processing it like hound dogs do.
That's
I've
awesome.
never seen a bulldog do that before until I got Sugar. And that's unique to me. And that's something that, my program moving forward in the direction it's going is more towards the preserving of the white English more so than the Alapaha. Like the Alapaha, I love the breed. I love the natural protective instincts in it. But as far as future breedings go, the one that I just had a few months ago is probably going to be my last probably indefinitely, because I can still get those same traits, but even better traits in its foundation breed. with a lot more stability and, in my opinion, better traits, because they do great with my birds. Like, not very many dogs are great bird dogs that don't want to eat them.
Right.
It's, I like my chickens. I could be a chicken farmer all day long, honestly. Birds are enjoyable.
I've always wondered that.
They really are.
Yeah, I was thinking of, in the end, I kind of want to relax and do kind of a homestead kind of thing and just escape this reality, rather.
Yeah, and it's enjoyable.
Chickens just seem cool to have.
And when you have a bulldog that doesn't want to eat them when they start frolicking and flying and fluttering and raising all kinds of hell because there's a threat somewhere, and your bulldog is like, okay, let's go see what's going on. That's amazing. Like, it really, truly is amazing. And yet this bulldog's firing up and hitting the fence to try to destroy the neighbor's dog because they know the neighbor's dog is an outsider and is not supposed to be in the area, and they need to do everything they can to ward it off. But the dogs within their yard, they know they're supposed to be there. Natural genetics, they have that ability to understand what's inside is supposed to be here, what's outside, I have to keep it out.
Well, let me ask one of the previous questions in reverse then.
Okay.
Since you are the Alapaha breeding, you say, is probably going to be your last. Are you still going to be using any Alapaha in your influence of your White English?
No.
Okay, so that you're cutting that off.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and the only, like, my youngest Alapaha with the White English influence, the youngest dogs are 5. 2 males only. I did that breeding specifically for heat. I only had 2 pups. I kept both of them. I called that my fat bastard breeding because I got monster and and there were some chunkers. But yeah, that's what I call them, is my fat bastards. I literally had to take them off the milk bar at 2 weeks old because they were so big. I was worried about them having Slimmer syndrome because all they did was ate, and Sugar was like free milk all day long. She didn't cut them off. Like the picture I sent you where the big white chunky bulldog with the puppy hanging off the nipple, okay, that's Sugar and that's Dumpling. Sugar wasn't very stern with saying, no more milk, your teeth hurt. She's like, okay, you win. Like, she's a great mama dog, but yeah, she didn't know when to say no. But yeah, like, with them getting up in age, it's the potential to use them in the program if I needed to. Yeah, I possibly could, but why? I've got a good foundation of dogs already. Getting some other things lined up with my last White English breeding that I did, just to help keep enough genetic diversity within the line that I've got, because I do want to focus on the car line specifically, so that, I wouldn't have a need to necessarily use them in my White English program. And plus, you got to get those undesirable Alapaha traits out, which is far harder to do than it is to add it in.
Right, okay.
Like, and that's the biggest thing right there, is you've got to figure out, what is my risk? What's my risk-based assessment to say, if I were to do this, how difficult would it be for me to correct undesirable things that I could be adding in versus just staying with what I've got?
Gotcha. Now, when you're planning out breedings, how close are you willing to go?
I'm not a fan. I'm not a big fan of doing brother to sister breedings, unless it's a half brother, half sister type breeding. Just because, unless I know the dogs well enough and what's behind them, that type of a breeding can make or break your program. It's one of those things that if I know there's an out relatively close behind them, then I would potentially do something close like that. But it would be a one-time deal, and then my next breeding would have to be something to make sure I'm not negatively impacting my future. Because, if you think about it, the dogs that are behind your program, if you keep breeding off of that same dog that has the same temperament and traits, it eventually is going to revert back to those original dog breeds. I mean, it's kind of like people are like, oh yeah, I did genetic testing. It says I've got this much Pitbull in my dog. Well, you keep breeding and line breeding and line breeding and line breeding, you're going to have those genetic markers that are going to keep building up, and eventually your type that you're producing is going to be locked in based on what's predominantly behind them. So it's there's a lot of risk. I wouldn't say no, I wouldn't do that type of a breeding, but it's going to have a lot of planning for what would my plan be afterwards. What's my next step? Just because, and I know you're going to hear some people with backlash saying, "Oh my God, that's incest, that's this, that's that," and I'm like,
that's the dog world. I mean,
the animal world doesn't work that way. They don't stop and look at each other and be like, "Yeah, I know you're my mom, but hey, why not?" Like they're not us. They don't have reasoning skills. They're not smart animals, but not the same.
They're not. What's the word? Sentient. They're not. That's a big problem. So many people just more and more want to humanize their dogs. Oh, fuck. Yeah.
That makes my head hurt.
It's a nightmare.
You are still below me on the totem pole. I'm not going to feed you my freaking ice cream while I'm eating it. Like, I can't do that. You're licking my mouth. No, don't lick me. I'm sorry, that's gross. I love you, but don't lick me.
Yeah.
Well, and you did humanize animals, and that's going to be the massive downfall to the pet world.
What does your selection and testing process look like?
So, sometimes I like to just sit back and watch the dogs interact on their own to see who's more dominant, who's more passive, who they shy away from the play and the roughhousing, and they're just kind of laid back and chill. And then others, like, especially whenever you're getting into those more assertive dogs, I do like to kind of manhandle them and roughen them up just a little bit more to kind of see what buttons to push to get a negative reaction, especially with the Alapaha. Like my white English, I don't have to do that because they don't have that switch quite like the Alapaha does. But the Alapaha, because they can be very reactive to harsh corrections or reactive to negative situations because of just how they're bred and how they're wired. Like those are dogs that, like my boy Monster, when he was younger, like my kids played rough with them, and they, grab their cheeks and kind of shake them to see how are they going to respond. And just like mimicking how mama corrects them. Are you going to challenge mom when she goes to correct you? If you are, then I know you're not a dog that needs to go to an average pet home. You're a dog that you have to have the right owner, because you could be too much for that person. Do you guard toys? Does your tail cock up when you start walking stiff when you have a toy because you're resource guarding and the other pups are trying to take it? And I'm like, these are all things that I'm looking for in evaluating my pups, because it does tell you a lot. Like, one of my white English, she's quiet, he's reserved. I had another female, she was the same way, quiet, reserved. And I'm like, okay, you actually like that bond and that connection with the other animals or with the people only. So that means, okay, if I had goats, for instances, or even my chickens, I could put that pup out there with them and they can live with them. And that's where that bond is going to be generated and created. And I know that they're going to do well in that setting. And then whenever I have others that they're more outgoing and they're more bubbly and they're more, hey, look at me, kind of like the class clown of the litter, like, those are ones that I'm like, okay, you could easily go to almost anybody's home because you are so bubbly and outgoing and you would adapt well to any environment. But I just try to watch for those little subtle personality traits within the litter of puppies. And then, as they start to mature, start to see how they really interact with each other. Like, and when you have a mama dog, leave that mama dog with those pups as long as possible, because she is going to establish amazing life skills that those dogs need. And sometimes I think we as breeders do not do our pups the proper service by pulling them away from the mom so soon. I know it gets expensive, because right now I'm like, feed bill's crazy. Because, I still have a few pups at home that I need to get moved, but they're still with one of the mom dogs. And she's still establishing, when you're being a jerk, she'll correct them. I mean, and she'll pin them down, and she lets them know, hey, you need to cut that out. But it's creating better dogs for their homes, because they do understand those boundaries that we, as the owners, don't have to be like, oh, crap. What am I doing? I was too harsh. I was this, I was that, or correcting enough. Well, the mom did the work for us. 8 weeks, I think, is honestly it's too early, in my opinion. 10 weeks, 12 weeks, I think that's a good balancing act to understand your puppies better, because now they're more showing their personalities and coming into their own and showing, am I going to be more dominant? Because pups I thought were quiet and reserved actually turned out being more assertive as they got older. And it's a lot of time watching and observing. Handling. How do they respond when I give them a bath? How do they respond when I clip their nails? How do they respond when I give them their microchips? Are they fighting me, or do they just take it like a champ, like I didn't stick this big-ass needle in their scruff of their neck? Like, those are all little signs that you see during the handling of your pups.
Gotcha. And you have 11 on site, right?
And this is my personal dogs. So, and that does include one pup, and then I've got, 4 pups left to get off.
Okay. How are you able to tell the difference between resource guarding and just, say, being a rambunctious sibling, stealing the toy and running away and things like that? Break that down for people a little further, if you could.
So the body language is going to tell you everything when it comes to resource guarding. Playful, rambunctious, the body's loose. They're relaxed in their movement and their gestures. Resource guarding, they're going to be stiff. Tail's cocked, body movements much stiffer, head is held steady and tight. They're turning, they're shying away. The eye contact may or may not be there, but the stiffness of the body is really what's going to tell you a lot on that guarding part of the resource, whether it's a toy, whether it's food, whatever it may be. That body language is your telltale sign. If it's stiff, and they're real kind of slower in motion, they're not relaxed, they're not fluid, be mindful of that dog, because that dog can easily go to a point where they're going to snap, and they could potentially bite back at you because they don't want you to take it, whether it's the dog or your hand. That body language is going to be the first thing you're going to see. How do they respond? Are they stiff? Leave them be. Pull the other dog back. Get to a point where you can trade it out with them. Sometimes, like my girl Dumpling, when she knows she gets something that she knows she's not supposed to have, she'll kind of get stiff, but her movement is more slow, and she's looking at me like, I don't want to give it to you. She has a little bit stiffer motion, but it's nothing like a dog that's like, yeah, I'm going to fight you over this if you keep trying to take it from me. I do want to add that in there, that sometimes you will get a dog that they kind of mimic that stiffer body motion, but they're actually a quicker moving away from you just because they really don't want you to take it. But they're going to kind of tell you, like, shit, they're reluctant. Gotcha. Whereas them dogs that are really guarding something, that body language is very stiff, very rigid, very cold feeling. Tail says a lot, especially if they cock that tail high over their back and they're telling me, you need to back off because I'm not letting you have this. And whenever I have pups that do that, I do try to interject a little bit to try to get them to be reassured that they don't have to be so guarding over something. But again, you can only do so much as an owner with dogs like that, because it's a genetic thing that's just how they're wired. You can help kind of teach them, I guess you could say, quote unquote, coping skills. But again, dogs don't they're not rational in their thinking. It's genetics, and they're going to do what's genetically right for them to do, regardless what the consequence is. I mean, it's kind of like whenever I was growing up, like, hey, that dog is eating, leave it alone.
Right.
You know?
And I think that kind of goes back to, my rant about children and dogs.
Yes.
That's just the stupidest, most irresponsible way to get a kid bit is by not teaching them, leave the dog alone when they're eating.
And people don't teach their kids boundaries and how to interact with an animal.
Right.
And that's the biggest root cause. Like, it truly is the biggest root cause is people do not teach children the boundaries and the proper etiquette when it comes to interacting with animals.
Right. Now, your dogs are naturally protective, but
yes,
would you agree that, well, I guess it's not a matter of agreement because your yard is different than other yards. Would you say the females are hotter than the males?
That's a tough question to answer per se. I would say yes and no. I have both, and that's what's crazy is I have both. So my girl Sugar, she and I didn't send this video to you, but I'll send you a couple of videos to show you the heat behind a white English and the seriousness when they're engaged that they display. The males can be of the same tenacity. This young female I have, actually she's going to be 7 in April. My girl Helga, she's the mom to one of my litters of white English pups that I did. She actually surprised me. I feel horrible about what happened, but I feel super proud in the same sense. Super sweet dog. I got her when her and her brother came in from Georgia in December 2022. They settled in good. Took a little while to kind of warm up and really be like, okay, this is home. Kansas is now my home, not Georgia. But super sweet, mind you. She did great with transport. She did great with my son and his girlfriend, interacting with the puppies, like no issues whatsoever. Never, ever me questioning, would she even think about being remotely protective, let alone just barking if something seems out of line. I literally thought she was kind of just sweet, like just, oh yeah, I mean, I trust her with, my grandma, because she's a very calm dog. She's not overly boisterous. She's not overbearing. She's not overly powerful. Like, she's just a very, very well-balanced dog. Love her to death. And a friend came in, everything was great. He went into the bathroom. I was putting my shoes on to go do something. She was laying on the bed, no issues. As I'm bending down to put my shoes on, I hear screaming. I hear teeth chomping. She flew off that bed, and mind you, it was just her dog bed, flew off that dog bed, and she was like, you are not supposed to be here, get the fuck out. And she was trying to chomp his leg off.
Nice.
And all I could do, like, literally, she was like 7 feet away from me, and I was like, oh my God. So I grabbed and snatched my dog up. Thankfully, she didn't catch anything but just the outside of the pants. But just no bark, no growl, no nothing, just on it. And I was like,
I like
holy fucking shit.
I like that.
I literally, honestly, never expected it. I never expected it from her because she never displayed anything of those sorts, but just that something, and it was kind of, it was dim. I like my house dim in the evenings. It's very calm and relaxing. But yeah, it was just that subtle, quick, holy shit. But then I got some male dogs that, like Monster, he never accepted anybody outside of the family. And he's a jerk. He literally, I mean, he's his dad's son, but he's actually sweeter than his dad. He has a much closer emotional bond, which is why I love him even more. and why he was a better production from that breeding than his dad was. I mean, his dad produced better because he had that emotional connection that I need in my dog. But he's a dick. He's just as mean, and he's like, okay, let's go. I'll bite you. Give me the chance. With this breed, it's hard to say which one is more aggressive than the other. Honestly, I think the males in the Alapaha turn on sooner than the females do.
Right.
But then again, like, Dumplings turned on way sooner than her mom did. Her mom was probably 2 before she really turned on, and Dumplings, she's already started showing those protection traits. And I mean, she's got a deeper bark than most of the male dogs I've got. And she's alert, and she's on it, and she's like, you ain't supposed to be here. And, it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen when you do turn 2? I can only speak on this breed. I can say from, I had pits before, and I'd say the females were a little bit hotter than the males in the pits, but honestly, I think it really boils down to the connection that they create with their owners. I think that's really where you're going to have that separation between the two, because, those, like, men who own female dogs are going to say, yeah, my females are, hotter than my males. Well, the same can go for us females who we own males and females, but we find our males are more protective than the females. And I think it just depends on that bond that's generated between you and your dog. So but for me, I got a mix of both. So it's really hard to say.
I got
and the situation has an impact on it too.
Right. Yeah, that can definitely form a dog based on how much stress it's been exposed to and whatnot. What does your feeding regimen look like?
I free feed. So
really?
I've free fed for probably pushing 20 years, and it works. My dogs eat when they're hungry. They don't eat when they're not hungry. Because I have a busy schedule, and my evenings, I don't always have that same constant routine. And dogs like that constant routine. And some of my dogs, they may be hungry at different times than the other dogs. And it's, in my opinion, it's not really fair to make everybody be on that exact same schedule every single time. Now, if I had a dog that all they did was they would eat everything in front of them, then yeah, you're definitely going on a controlled feeding regimen. But because my dogs maintain their weight properly and they don't overeat, it's not an issue to keep feed out all the time. Because again, also, I've got some dogs that, like Sugar, she's my biggest female, and she eats less food than some of my smaller males do. So trying to balance that feed regimen is what I think one dog needs. Another dog may need double that. And it's so much easier just to let them have full capacity of what they need to maintain their weight as they need it.
Right. And they spend a lot of time outdoors and whatnot too, so that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Do you use any kind of supplements?
No, for the most part I don't. If I do use any supplements, it's usually for like my females whenever I do breedings. Revival Animal Health has a high-calorie supplement that I use. I think it's called NutriCal. I'd have to look it up to be 100% for sure, but Revival Animal Health is the only place to get it. It's similar to Dine, but it's safe for all animals. So if you own cats and they get into it, it's not going to hurt them because it doesn't have that propylene glycol, if I'm saying that correct.
I believe so, yeah.
But yeah, it does not contain that, and it actually has a better calorie ratio based on the amount that you're giving, and it's cheaper. Great success with it. If I do add anything else, usually if it's like the prep up to wintertime and I got some leaner dogs, I'll add that to their mix. Or I'll do like a high energy horse supplement, the oil that you can put onto the feed. I use that because I can get it at the local farm store, the gallon bottles. But other than that, it's not a constant regular supplement. It's just as a, any stress-induced things, any breeding changes or temperature changes that I'm like, shit, we got, if I think winter's coming up soon and I got a super duper lean dog, I may get him started, in August and September to start getting that weight up just to help get them that extra boost that's needed.
Right.
But rarely, and it's usually only with the younger dogs versus the older dogs, because the older dogs are like, shit, I need to start eating more.
Right.
Just to start building up and bulking up.
Okay. Now, you're making the move from both Alapahas and White English to just White English.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there anything in the White English that you visualize that you want to change with your line?
No.
Okay, you
Honestly,
love them as
the
is.
only thing is maintaining the size. That's the only thing that my goal is to maintain the line, and then to also focus more on the Mastiff traits in the White English versus the Bulldog traits. I do like the look of the Mastiff type White English because it's very majestic. It doesn't scream modern American Bulldog.
Right.
And it's just a very stately look that they have.
Sure. I see what you mean.
And there's very, very few, like literally very, very few of them left. Like the majority of them have, the typical Bulldog look, the shorter muzzle, the rounder skull. They don't have that flat top of the head with the longer muzzle in plane with each other at a parallel basis. Like they don't have, they have the smaller Bulldog canines versus the larger Mastiff canines. That's really the only thing that, I'm wanting to strive to keep going, because that type is getting fewer and fewer in the areas, actually just in the U.S. in general. Like you don't find those types as often as you used to.
Mm-hmm. I got you.
Because it also goes with the temperament as well, because that's where you get that separation between the Bulldog temperament versus the Guardian Mastiff type temperament within the breed.
Right. Okay. I can see where you're coming from. And I noticed that's the normal challenge when it comes to a lot of the band dogs, is trying to find that balance. You do want some Bulldog, obviously, but it's just about the ratio of how much
Correct.
Bulldog to how much Mastiff. Where can people find you?
I'm on Facebook. I do have my little Pine Time Alapaha Facebook group, and it's mild. Like I don't post hardly anything in my group. I mainly do on my page itself, and then I share to other groups. But I did shut my webpage down. I did have a Pine Time Alapaha webpage, but I want to redo it. And because I don't actively breed, it really wasn't worth keeping going when I can do it on Facebook for free.
Sure.
I'm in, the majority of all the Alapaha groups, as well as the White English, Old Southern White groups as well. There is a Alapaha White English Facebook group that I'm one of the admins on. That we have that as a group with both breeds listed and are welcome. Just because at the end of the day, you won't have an Alapaha without the White English.
Right.
And if you don't maintain the traits of the White English in your Alapaha program, you're steering away from what Lana originally was focusing towards. And that's what's important is keeping it back to the roots of what the breed was intended to be and what it was intended to function as. So we do want to make sure that folks have that understanding that. Without the White English, the Alapaha wouldn't be there, regardless if it was the ABBA line or the ARF line or the mix of the two. You can't have one without the other.
Right, okay. Now, when it comes to the Alapaha, was that the same focus for you when you were breeding Alapahas? Were you trying to bring out more Mastiff traits?
No, actually, so my thing with the Alapaha is I wanted to keep it at its original roots. What was the breed intended for? What was its intended standard to be? I was first exposed to the Alapaha in 1999. I had one, and that was my baseline. Protective, natural protection. A larger bulldog, not overly Englishly bulldoggy in looks, but you could tell it was a bulldog, and just that natural ability to distinguish between good and bad is key. When I got back into the Alapaha and I got my first dog, King, I'd gone to several shows and I've seen a lot, and I was watching the dogs, and I'm like, oh man, this is interesting. Like, I started seeing that, the dogs that were used were not what the breed was intended to be based off of. Seeing dogs that were heavy Old English influence, or dogs that are way below the breed standards, or you got some massive sway back going on, you got some shit temperaments going on, extra skittish. Like, these are things that were all standing out. Like, man, okay, like we deviated from what you intended it to be what you wanted it to be. Like, and this is where I say, like, Ray, unfortunately, he did the breed a disservice by putting it to the market too soon, because he wasn't able to go in and lock in the type and look that he was striving for before he just let it go.
Sure.
And unfortunately, he really probably should have used a different name, even though we know he was getting dogs directly from Lana's yard. He was going and doing breedings to direct White English in, the late 90s, early 2000s. So we know that for a fact. And it's like, dude, like, pick what you want to do. Like, the original Alapahas that Lana was creating, like, those were some aggressive, protective dogs. Like, the traits were there. He just wanted to change the look. Well, I wanted to make sure that I was still sticking more towards what I knew the Alapaha was based off of, and that's keeping it back to its roots, not this shorter, squattier, extra bully, protective dog. Like that, I'm sorry, that's not an Alapaha. Crank tails, you should not be having crank tails in an Alapaha breeding. Like, you should not have pinched off, closed-in nares, extra short muzzles with extensive underbites. Like, that's not what you should have had in an Alapaha. Like, form follows function, and I'm sorry, these dogs are short-lived when you get down to the form follows function. It was kind of disheartening the more I seen and the more I was able to physically see in person. And I mean, I'm not a tall person, but it ain't rocket science when you're looking at dogs and you be like, hey, that dog is mighty small. So it's why, for me posting some of the pictures with, like, my dogs next to a 5-gallon bucket, you can see from a size comparison, like, okay, what are we working with? They're not supposed to be a little pocket bully that's supposed to be, tenacious, wanting to go after anybody and everybody. They're supposed to have some size to them. They're not supposed to scream English Bulldog influence.
Yeah.
Like, and that's where my program for the Alapaha was. I brought Sugar in. And she's done exactly what I needed her to do for my dogs and my line, is take it back to its roots. And the roots are truly tracing back to the original foundation dogs that were used on Lana's yard between Lana and John Connors on those programs.
So the reason, I'm just trying to make sure I understand this correctly. So you're basically cutting off what you were doing with the Alapaha because it's just not the dog for you anymore, or do you feel like you've made enough of a dent by putting dogs in certain hands?
Honestly, it's not the dog for me. It's the people. I'm not into the fad, and everybody getting into the breed because of the Merle and the Flash, and everybody wants to be a breeder. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to step back from that, because I'm not, sometimes I don't even really want to consider myself as a breeder because I don't do it frequently enough, per se. I breed for myself first and foremost, but, what I'm getting in the Alapaha, I already have in the White English.
Right.
But I have better stability whenever it comes to livestock. I can't get that with the Alapaha. Doesn't mean I won't always have an Alapaha. I can't say that. But as far as me breeding them, as of right now, I'm done. I do have some cards placed that, I do have some pups coming back in, the next coming years that I can always still have access to having one on my yard. But as far as me physically producing them, I'm just going to, respectfully step back because, I want to enjoy my dogs. And all my dogs are older. But that's no more where my heart is on keeping going.
Right. Okay.
The White English really is, it's special, it's unique. And until you physically have owned one, it's hard to just really tell somebody what it is that they've got. Like a good buddy of mine, we've been friends for over 12 years. He was in the Alapaha long before, I got my dog back, got my second dog back in 2012. Long time breeder, super duper great guy. I would tell him about Sugar all the time, I try to describe over the years, and he would hear me, and mind you, my dogs come from his stock too, my Alapahas do. And he'd hear me, but he didn't quite hear me until he got his first wet. So when he got his first White English, then he was able to say, now I know what you're talking about. It's hard to describe it for somebody to truly understand and grasp what it is you're trying to describe until they physically have one.